Mark Selby, Chair and CEO of Canada Nickel Company, advancing the Crawford nickel sulfide discovery, which in just over a few years is now one of the largest nickel sulfide discoveries ever. And we recently announced 18 transactions to pick up an additional 13 targets to consolidate what we think is going to be one of the world's most important nickel districts anchored around Timmins, Ontario.
Mark, good to see you again. Saw you last week in London. You got back safely, did you?
I did, most certainly. No Omicron either, so all good.
No Omicron. All right. I'm sorry we couldn't give that to you as a gift, parting gift. But I want to talk to you because we had a great conversation last week. Put a link below for those who haven't seen it yet. But you put out the announcements with regards to these 18 acquisitions for 13 new targets, and you talk the language of a district hiding in plain sight. First of all, tell us about the deal. I mean, how long did that take to put together?
Yeah, so we've been working on it, over the last 6 months. We these types of deposits, again, Dumont, Past Life, Crawford, this one, the regional ones that we had, they have a very distinct geophysical footprint. So we looked across the broader Timmins region, and we're shocked to find that there was a huge number of targets lying out there, and was even more surprised that when we started going through the historical drilling information that's available through the geological survey, we've called them uncoveries because when you combine the geophysical footprint that we know is a great indicator of targeting this nickel and some of the historical drilling, we're just putting the two together to say we still have some more work to do for sure, but we probably made at least a half a dozen discoveries out of the 13 targets that we just picked up.
How do you say that? I mean, how much data have you got? Because we get a lot of CEOs come on here, they talk about targets, and most of those targets don't become discoveries and don't become mines. So you've got some data, one presumes, that's going to back up your view that you have identified, or you're building up additional districts here.
Yeah. So first off, geophysically, again, everyone talks about exciting anomalies and targets, that can be pretty meaningless. In this case, again, that the way this mineralization gets formed, does give it a very distinct geophysical footprint. We anchored the analysis based on Crawford and some of the other targets. And what was amazing was, as we went through this very long list of targets, there was only one that did not yield a hole that had serpentinized dunite or serpentinized peridotite. So our targeting was literally, close to 95% in terms of geophysical anomaly, hits the right host mineralization. And then we've got the second level down where, some of these targets, 10 of which are larger than Crawford. There was a whole series of drill holes that were done in the 50s, 60s, 80s, 90s, 2000s. But, again, looking back with the lens that we have now, able to show that, they've delineated in some cases, a kilometer by 500 meters worth of the kind of host mineralization that we're talking about, and logged in a way that describes the mineralization in a very similar way to what we have. Some of them do have assays, and again, north of 0.3%, which for us, is higher grade material. So, very, very exciting by what we found, which was why there's 35 pages in that press release.
Yeah, it was a long one. But I really need to understand this because, again, I want to understand what is just headline grabbing and what's just, attention grabbing stuff and what's real. You've taken the data from Crawford and said, here are the variables which we think are really, really important. If we can go and match those elsewhere, we believe that we can more easily target and certainly do something that no one else has done before. Because you're talking about these are uncoveries, not discoveries, uncoveries. So it's all been laying in plain sight, according to you. So what precisely did you identify that you needed to find, and then how did you go about finding those things?
Yeah. So again, the process that's serpentinizes the rock to create the nickel minerals that we can then recover also creates magnetite and again a certain amount of magnetite. Given it has a certain amount of magnetite, it lights up within a certain magnetic intensity range. So Steve Balcher is our VP exploration. He basically, if you look at a map of the Abitibi, sort of raw geophysical data, lots of stuff lights up. But what he was able to do is to basically tune into the sort of the magnetic intensity that our deposits show up and basically take out the rest of the background noise. And again, we just went through systematically, there was X targets that showed up. I'm not going to say because there's a couple that we haven't picked up yet. And, basically went through bang, 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 bang. And we were shocked by how good this was at targeting, and delivering serpentinized dunite and peridotite that had come up. The second piece of it was, the reason some of this stuff hadn't been drilled before was in the 70s, early 70s, there was a few nickel discoveries around the Timmins area, and those were on the edge of these structures. So what you saw was a lot of the drilling that happened in the 70s and 90s was around the edges of the structures, trying to get stuff that was kind of north of 1% nickel. But again, what we're interested in is the fact that the last 150 meters of the hole, hit 0.3% nickel, on the edge of what is a 2 kilometer by 400 meter anomaly, or a 6 kilometer by 300 meter anomaly, and we saw that time and time again. So it's just looking at some of this historical data with a new lens that makes this stuff come up and become very, very real.
Right. Okay. And you're saying like one or more of these are bigger than you've got at Crawford, which is already what, top 10 in terms of size globally?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
And the largest discovery since the early 70s. And there's 10 of them that have a larger geophysical footprint than what we had at Crawford.
Gotcha. Okay. So given that you want to sort of, I guess, position yourself as potentially something like a Sulawesi or a Sudbury or Eastern Goldfields or a Bushveld or, Jingshuan, for instance, to do that, you're going to have to piece all these together. But are you going to be doing that now, or is there a process or time frame for doing? Because we all want you focused on Crawford and delivering Crawford. So what's the plan?
Yeah, Crawford remains focus one. That feasibility study on track. For this by this time next year. What we're going to do with these regional properties is first we want to do some more detailed geophysics on them, and then we're going to start to pick away drilling. Each of them, and again doing it on a wide space basis. To highlight the potential. We don't necessarily need a lot more resource. We're talking about a 50 to 100% increase in the resource at Crawford, which would end up being close to 2 to 2.5 billion tons. Another 500 million tons it won't be part of the mine plan and won't add value that way. But what we want to clearly demonstrate, when you look at when projects get taken out, for 1.2 to 1.5 times project NPV, it's because A, they have a robust project, and B, they have a clearly demonstrated regional resource potential. And it's that latter part, that we're going to do enough drilling at this point to be able to demonstrate the potential. Once Crawford gets fully valued, and again, that would be at a multiple of where we are in today's share price, then we'll look at raising the money to drill that out more intensely. But, again, Crawford, job one, regional potential, job two, and it'll be just focused on potential as opposed to resource at this point in time.
So what does that signal to the marketplace in terms of what you're prepared to do, or how far you're prepared to go? Because you talked about getting a strategic partner in the end of this year. Is that separate to this announcement, or does it have any bearing on what you've announced?
Yeah, the strategic investor, no, it's a separate process, and again, targeting having that in place by the end of the year. Obviously, this kind of district scale potential, has helped. Has helped sell it definitely in terms of what we've got here. So, again, which is what we want to do. I mean, the majors want to buy large scale, multi-decade, multi-expansion assets, and the fact that we have all of these nickel targets sitting next to highways, railways, power lines, close to infrastructure, and made up of rocks that spontaneously absorb CO2, is a massive, upside. And again, the stocks reacted very, very well, but I don't think people really realize, the scale of what we've been able to, uncover here, uncover in plain sight effectively.
Well, you make a good point here. You've talked extensively about the past year with regard to net zero carbon potential for yourselves in terms of your own project or projects. But at this scale, it starts looking like a very different company in terms of carbon credits as well.
Oh, yeah. No, in terms of the scale and the carbon credits, Crawford, the resource we have from the main zone, which is about 900 million tons, is on less than a square kilometer of this geophysical footprint. We just acquired 37 square kilometers of a similar geophysical footprint. That's 40 times what's there. And again, we know this type of mineralization does spontaneously absorb CO2. I've been joking that we might end up being a carbon credit mine with a nickel byproduct credit. All of these rocks that we've just acquired, we know, will have that kind of capacity based on the logs that we've seen from the drilling that was done historically. In terms of the scale of what's there, people think that new nickel discoveries are, it's got to be a new discovery that's the major source of new supply. The reality in the nickel industry is we've had effectively two generations of nickel supply. The first one was big sulfide deposits like Sudbury, but that was known for 15 to 20 years before Sudbury. Inco figured out how to separate nickel from copper, and it produced a pile of nickel just in time for World War I when they used it for armor. Qingshan in the mid 2000s, developed nickel pig iron, but again, it wasn't some brand new discovery in Sulawesi. In fact, most of the resource that's being mined today that represents the bulk of the growth in nickel production over the last decade was drilled off decades ago, and anything that wasn't drilled off before then was definitely drilled off by Inco in the 1960s and 70s. Major new sources of nickel come from taking existing resources with a new lens and a new source of demand, which wants the specific characteristics of the type of nickel being produced. Inco went on from that early 1900s to become a Dow Jones 30 company in 1930. Qingshan today went from a small regional stainless steel producer in central China to being being the world's largest stainless producer and the world's largest nickel producer. And the read-through value from the nickel mines, which has a little stub of what Qingshan has, would be tens of billions of dollars worth of market cap today. That's what the leaders of a new generation of nickel supply, in terms of the market value they're able to generate. We truly believe that the Timmins district, and what we've got started here with Crawford, is going to be the leading large-scale, low-carbon source of nickel, for the EV market and consumers in the West, who are desperate to get new sources of nickel and don't have to depend on Indonesia and China to get that nickel.
It's interesting, and we've talked about this on one of our shows, the weekly Battery Metals show, where Indonesia limiting permits for new MPI projects and what the potential impact of that could be in terms of not only supply, but in terms of pricing. And for you guys, you producers in the West, do you see that? Well, how do you see that being played out?
I think, the bear case for nickel, has been, Indonesia always comes along and spoils the party. They always seem to find more nickel, and it's endless. But I think if you read through a whole series of announcements this year, it might not be quite as endless as people think, and particularly the Indonesian government believes. In the spring they started limiting there's no new NPI projects that are being permitted. It has to go through to a final product. What caused the nickel price to spike last week by nearly 10% in a week is that the Indonesian government is mulling a ban on the export of nickel pig iron in order to conserve the nickel resource they have to be focused on more higher value added production. It was always going to be a challenge for Western car companies to depend on Indonesian sources of, basically a Chinese controlled part of Indonesia as a source of new supply. These measures by Indonesia are going to make that even less likely that's going to occur. And the reality is nickel supply in the West has been shrinking, for most of the last 10 years. And I think the car companies in North America, based on the intensity of the discussions we're having, have kind of woken up to that reality. And if they want, the amounts of nickel that they need by the end of this decade, they're not going to get it from the existing producers, and they need to find new sources of supply, as soon as possible.
They are. And if anyone wants to know more about that one, go join us for our weekly nickel show on cruxinvestor.com. Bit of advertising. Just back to you though, in terms of the strategic partner that you're bringing in. We've had a few questions sent in with regards to what that could look like off the back of our chat last week. So they're coming in as, obviously they're putting money in of some quantum to be announced, for some equity position to be announced. And how active do you want them to be? Do they expect to be, or how influential in terms of the decision? Are they getting a board seat? Can you give us some insight into what type of relationship we're looking at there?
Yeah, they're again, given sort of the type of stake in terms of 10 to 15% range that we're kind of been targeting all the way along. That having a board seat on a board of now that would be 8 would be is in line with that kind of equity ownership. In terms of being active, again, we think there's a limited set of opportunities that are out there. Again, with the district scale play that we have, there's a much larger Crawford or sets of Crawfords waiting to be developed. So having a deep pockets partner alongside, to help unlock some of that sooner than later, will obviously, be much more helpful. And again, get us to that point of being the next Inco or the next Qingshan of this third generation of nickel supply.
Right, and I think, and again, we also people suggesting that they believe they know who it is, because you've done deals previously with Glencore, but there are a lot of players out there looking. Well, not a lot. There's more than one looking.
There's more than one, and there's different groups that are out there. So
right. So you've got optionality.
Stay tuned on that.
You've got competitive tension.
Yeah,
you're in control.
Yes.
Okay, Mark. That's good enough for me. I just wanted a quick catch up because we didn't get the chance to discuss some of those things because this came out after we talked last week. Exciting times. Not long before the end of the year. Strategic partner in place by end of the year. Is that right?
That's right.